It's not a deal until it's a deal. Overnight, Ukrainian drones striking inside Russia. Still, details are being ironed out for the two sides to stop attacks on energy infrastructure. Those new strikes coming even after President Trump held calls this week with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. But a glimmer of hope as the two sides conducted their largest prisoner exchange since the start of the war. It's an all-about face from just 3 weeks ago when Trump and Zelensky got into a shouting match in the Oval Office. Well, our guest now is a key reason Ukraine and Russia could be at the doorstep of peace. General Keith Kellogg is serving as an assistant to President Trump and his special presidential envoy to Ukraine and was on that call yesterday when Trump spoke with Zelensky. The general joins me now here in studio. Good to see you, sir. It's been a while.
Yep, Kara, thanks for having me.
More than 2 decades, actually.
Yeah,
we go back as far as Iraq.
Yes, we do.
So let me just begin with a simple question. Where do these talks stand right now?
I think we are closer to peace, ceasefire, than we've ever been in the last 3 years. And I think really it very candidly curious because of Donald J. Trump. Because he said, even during the campaign, that he wanted to bring this war to a conclusion. And he's driving it really hard. You know, we're only at 58 days. But he's talked to both President Putin and President Zelensky. He's brought a really first-class team in. We're all working really hard. We have our lanes that we're running on, and everybody's working. It's a really synchronized team, well together, be it Secretary Rubio or Steve Witkoff that's running the Russia lane, SecDef Hegseth, National Security Advisor Mike Wallace. I mean, the team, like yesterday when I was looking in the Oval Office, I mean, it's really a tight team. And we've got one goal, and that's to end this war driven by the President of the United States. And I think we're really close. I said on another station a while back that I said, well, I think we can get it done within the first 100 days. And then I held my breath. And we're at day 58. I think we're going to get there.
So how did we go from that Oval Office disaster between Trump and Zelensky to you being on the phone yesterday with the two of them for what you described as a very measured, balanced call? What was the secret sauce? How did that happen?
I think what happened was 3 weeks ago in the Oval Office, President Zelensky realized he was dealing with a very different politician and leader in Donald J. Trump, because he was starting to play to the audience. We'd forewarned him that morning, don't go there. And he was playing to the press when they came in there, and I said, oh, he's going down a bad path with President Trump. And that's what happened.
You told Zelensky that?
We told him, we advised him. We said early in that morning, we were at the Hay Adams Hotel. I was there with 13 other senators. We kind of said, okay, look, we're going to kind of walk you through this, what it looks like when you come into the Oval Office so you're not surprised by it, and understand that President Trump is significantly different than Joe Biden. And everything was fine till the press came in. And then it just like a light switch came on and it changed. And said, okay, over to you. And as the president said, it was sort of like Apprentice 101. And he made a big mistake in doing that. And so when he was escorted out of the White House, the president said, I'm done with this. And I think he realized, oh, okay. And I was on a Council of Foreign Relations talk right after that. And I said, and people didn't like what I said, but it was true. It's sort of like you hit somebody upside the head with a 2x4, waters your eyes. That's exactly what happened. And then everybody said, okay, let's reset the fight. Let's reset the battlefield. The president talked to President Putin for a little over 2 hours. Remember, that talk was translated, so that's the reason why it was 2 hours.
That's why it took longer than the one with Zelensky.
And Zelensky's 1 hour because that was done in English. And that's where we're at as of yesterday.
How did you convince Zelensky and Trump to get on the phone yesterday? And then describe to me the tone. How did they talk to each other?
Yeah. It wasn't, President Zelensky asked, and you know, President Trump's really magnanimous. And Zelensky asked for the call. We got the call with the president. The president said, sure. And the tone was incredible. It was actually a discussion. We didn't go any really areas that were real true controversial areas. They were all like, it was like a business meeting. And when you listen to both of them talking, especially with the president, first of all, the president had an incredible grasp of the details. And they started talking everything from the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant to the young kids that were taken hostage back into Russia, to actually the precious metals deal and the discussions on that. It was a full, wide-range discussion with the President of the United States. And it was really good because it was a give and take, both sides. The President did, obviously, because he's the President of the United States, he did the discussions, led the discussions, and it was between those two we just sit back and observe because that's our role as advisors, and he just kind of let it.
Let me ask you the fact, because I even wrote this down in my notes, that Trump is a businessman, and you mentioned Zaporizhia. So he says, let the U.S. have these nuclear power plants like Zaporizhia that Russia controls. Is this to ensure Ukraine's security?
See, you pick up on it. Absolutely. When people said, oh, he wants to run a nuclear power plant, I nearly said, you missed this. It's inside the oblast, or a state of Zaporizhia. And it's the largest power plant in Europe, provides 1/3 of the power for the rest of Ukraine. And the president said, if we control that, then that helps secure not only the Zaporizhia part of that around there, but also that gives them the security. So the president was thinking like three-dimensional chess. And that's exactly what, and a lot of people said, well, he wants to run a power plant. No,
right.
He runs much deeper than that. It was exactly what you said. And it's so interesting that Zelensky picked up on that right away. And Zelensky said, yeah, this is not a bad idea. And he kind of agreed to it.
So then let me ask you about Putin, because he already said he won't accept troops from NATO nations. So where do stabilization forces come from then?
Well, that's a great question, because there's a concern from the Russians. But my experience with President Trump is he doesn't let anybody veto his plans. He'll go where he wants to go with it. That will be a position for negotiation. He doesn't want Western troops. Well, you could go other places. Even a few weeks ago, Vice President Vance said the same thing. Well, you can pull the Saudis or the Indians, or somebody that's credible, though. It can't be somebody who's not credible. One of the problems you had in Lebanon with UNIFIL is because none of those forces they had on the ground were credible. That's the reason why Hezbollah kept running rampant in southern Lebanon. So they're going to have to be credible forces, but everybody understands that. But that's part of the negotiation. We've got teams going in this week that are going in with Russians, Ukrainians, in our teams. We have part of my team's going to be there. The National Security Advisors team's going to be there. The Secretary of State's team's going to be there under Michael Anton, and they're going to discuss this. So those are all items that are going to be on the table for discussion. They're going to be proximity discussions, meaning one group's going to be in this room, one group in this room, and they'll sit and talk, go back and forth, sort of like shuttle diplomacy in a hotel, and that's how it's going to work. And then we'll find out where everybody stands.
So we know that Ukraine has already agreed to give up minerals, nuclear plants, and some of its land. So what is Russia willing to give at this point?
Well, I think Russia really does want to get to a deal, and that's going to be part of the discussions. Here's how I kind of phrase it. It's sort of like if you ever watched the cage fight, when one of the competitors taps out because he's done fighting. This is one of those, I think both competitors want to tap out, and they're looking for the referee. It happens to be Donald J. Trump. And I think that's where we're going to go to.
Russia has said one of its red lines is the demilitarization of Ukraine. Ukraine isn't going to agree to that, clearly. So how do you get around that roadblock?
Well, I think when we talk about negotiations, one of their sort of comments they're going to make that it really don't work. It's sort of like if Russia came into the negotiation and said, you bought Alaska from us. We want it back. Okay, thank you for that discussion. We're not going to go there. These are kind of the discussions you say, how you get there, and the reasons for you can't do that, or the demilitarization, or whatever you want to call it. And I think those are points we bring up to them. I think the biggest issues, though, are already on the table, and they're actually in plain sight. And a lot of that is the land, And so the question is it de facto land or is it de jure land? Is it by sort of the same thing we did with the Wells Doctrine at the end of World War II when the Soviet Union went into the Baltics? We never agreed that they owned the Baltics or annexed the Baltics. We said, okay, it's de facto, you occupy it, but we don't say it's de jure, you own it. And this may be one of those discussions where you go to and say, we recognize that you're on the land because you do own it. You fought for that land, you now occupy it. And then we'll say, okay, maybe this is part of the deal. And I think the Ukrainians, to their credit, are amenable to this. It's going to be where are the Russians at, where are the Russians going to go? And I think we're starting to get signals from both sides that they're both kind of say, okay, this has gone on way too long, we could agree to it.
So you mentioned the Soviet Union. Let's go back. Soviet Union, Russia has invaded, half a dozen countries since the 1930s. So how do you make sure a ceasefire holds this time and that Russia doesn't carry out an invasion like this again? Trump is going to be in office only for 4 more years. Putin's been around for 25, and he's going to keep going. How do you get them to stick to this deal?
Well, I think I'm absolutely convinced that nothing's going to, once a ceasefire goes into place, peace goes into place, they're not going to mess around with Donald J. Trump. They are just not going to do that. And then you build, the people call it a steel porcupine. I made the comment, I've actually written about this, where I've said, well, maybe you want to make Ukraine like the Sparta of Central Europe. You make sure they're well-trained, well-equipped, And a lot of that is going to be on the Europeans' call because it's in their backyard. And you can do that. And I don't think the Russians want to do this again. I mean, when you look at the losses on both sides, they're astronomical. I mean, we're looking at losses we have not seen since World War II. When you talk about we're not talking 10,000 or 20,000. We're talking in hundreds of thousands. Look, the Russians, the Soviets at the time, they left Afghanistan after losing 18,000. When you look at what the United States did, the Ukrainians have lost more in this war than we lost in the Korean War and Vietnam War combined. I think both sides are saying, like, okay, we don't want to fight this fight again, at least in the near term. Does President Putin want to do it? Sure, but if you have a credible deterrence, and any nation does, you're not want to go back into the fight. And I think that's where you want to build to.
Yeah, there's been this reporting out there, and you and I were talking about this, that the Kremlin doesn't want you at the table. Is that because you're too balanced?
Well, I think Steve Woodcock is a great guy to run that lane, and he's doing a great job with it. I'm going to let somebody else make that call out there. I mean, I know there was
you each have your lanes, and you got things to this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, the guy who got it to this point was Donald J. Trump. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I think he's got a great support team with Steve Woodcock or myself or Rubio or Hegseth or Mike Waltz, who's ever out there. It's a great team. But the guy who drove this, the reason we are here today, is President Donald J. Trump. That's exactly the reason. Because look, what Joe Biden said, when President Biden said, you know, as long as it takes as much as it takes, that's a bumper sticker. It wasn't a strategy. And when he made the comment in a press conference that maybe a minimal incursion was okay, his definition of minimal incursion and Putin's probably two different definitions. And President Trump saw that. And I think people respect and actually fear Donald J. Trump because it goes back to what we did in the first administration. I mean, he was without question, he was ready to use a hockey term, willing to drop gloves if it ever came to that. Look what he's doing right now with the Houthis. He's willing to strike when he needs to be struck, and people respect that. And there's a little bit of fear to that. And I think that's exactly what you need in a president of the United States. It's a different president, a different way of looking at the world. So I think if anybody gets the credit, one person should get that credit for this nation and for the world. That's Donald J. Trump. Macron of France hasn't been able to do it. We know Merkel, when she was the chancellor of Germany, couldn't do it. We know Boris Johnson couldn't do it. The only leader of the world, the free world, was able to pull that off as President Trump. And God bless him for being able to do that.
And he has you and Witkoff and his posse along with him. We look forward to what happens next. Saudi is the next step, correct?
It is, Carol.
All right, and we'll follow the diplomatic dance as you describe it in the hotel there. General Keith Kellogg, really appreciate your time.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me be with you.